welcome you all. My name is Toby Berry, and I'm the Neighborhood Development Director for Community Action Agency. I'd like to welcome you to the next educational session for the Community Foreclosure Coalition on scam alerts. And I'd like to introduce Fred Parker, who will be handling the facilitation of this evening.
All right, good evening, everyone. Hey, that was a little feedback, but thank you again, Toby. Switch to this mic. Let's try that. Hey, thank you again, Toby, and thank you, Community Action Agency. Community Action Agency is our founding partner, and they've been such a great partner to us, and we appreciate all of their support. And so we're glad to bring to you this great community event today that we have. We're going to have some great information, have a great panel. We're going to get into that in just a bit. But just so that you know, today we're going to talk about an interesting topic. As it shows up there, we're talking about if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You know, we all have heard of so many stories, or may know someone, or personally may have been victims of scams. There's a little feedback there. All right. Is that better? Great. And so we're going to talk about this at length. We got a great panel. I'm going to go through all the people that we have here. But let me just give you a little bit of kind of how we got to this point. We started with the Community Foreclosure Coalition, and Nita Delaney, which is right here. She headed up this coalition, started it with our founding partner, Community Action Agency. It evolved a great organization, and we did such a great job of Nita spearheading this. We were able to evolve into 9 counties. But with our Community Foreclosure Coalition, which launched in 2009, it grew over to 75 partners here in the Jackson, Lenawee, and Hillsdale County. We launched a website, which is up here for your convenience, and is also on our brochures, which is www.jlhcfc.org, which is another resource, a one-stop shop for our local people that are facing foreclosure, that are looking for resources. So a lot of great things happened from that, and it has evolved to what we call Region 7 Voices for Action. And so we're still working in tandem with the Community Foreclosure Coalition, but we've had the privilege now of expanding into 9 counties, including Jackson, Lenawee, and Hillsdale, but now into Ingham, Eaton, Shiawassee, Livingston, Clinton, and Washtenaw County, all trying to do our best with wrapping our arms around this foreclosure crisis, providing resources, providing good information to our local community members about foreclosure, what they can do, and we want to make sure with our message today that we want our community members to understand that they just don't have to be victims of foreclosure rescue scams. I would like to segue just for a bit and give you just a quick local perspective of kind of what's going on here in our region. And so foreclosures, as we know, they've been on the rise for a number of years. Last year, we saw a slowdown in foreclosure. You may have read on the local news or heard about it and on the news or TV stations that foreclosures had slowed down in the fourth quarter of 2009. And so we know a lot of that's due to the robo-signing scandal. There was this whole thing you may have read about where a lot of these big lending institutions were just signing these mortgage documents and not doing their due diligence, not making sure that these homeowners should be going into foreclosure. And so as a result, many of them went back and reviewed their process and revised their process. And so we've seen a slowdown in foreclosures, but it's expected that this year there should be a lot of repossessions. And we expect as many as a million bank repossessions this year. That's what some predictions say. And so to give you a closer picture of what's happening here in our region, Region 7, you know, this gives you an idea of some of the numbers we're seeing. And in Jackson, we're seeing about 253 foreclosure filings just in February 2011 alone. And so the numbers, again, have gone down a little bit, but we're certainly not out of the woods yet. And as I stated, we expect some of this is and partly due to this slowdown in the pipeline of some of the lending institutions because of this foreclosure robo-signing scandal thing, ordeal here. Let's look a little bit closer. So if we look at this on a per housing unit basis, if we're just talking about Jackson County, That's where we are today. We're talking 1 out of every 270 housing units is facing a foreclosure filing in 2011. That is pretty disappointing, but it's a reality that we're facing. And to really look and see how we look against some of the Michigan picture, the national picture, Jackson is exceeding both the Michigan and the national average as it relates to foreclosure. So we don't want to paint a bleak picture, but what we're trying to do is paint a picture that make sure that we understand that we still have some work to do, and we are responding. We have been responding. Our local organizations are on the ground, Community Action Agency being one of them, and doing our part to respond as a local community to the foreclosure crisis that we are facing. Again, we're talking 1 out of every 270 homes. Our Region 7, those 9 counties that I spoke about, as we're looking at February foreclosures, we're talking about 12% of the foreclosure filings came just out of our region, which is a lot. The average foreclosure sale price in Jackson County is now down to $35,073. So again, some hard facts, a hard reality, but it's what we're facing. And we're here to do something about it, and that's what we want to talk about today. So let's talk about a little bit why we're here. We have a great panel. We're going to get into this in just who our panelists are in just a moment. But if you have read in the news or heard anything, and some of you may know personally that this foreclosure crisis that we just spoke about, that's been around for a little while, has really led to fertile ground for foreclosure rescue scams. At the end of 2009, foreclosure scams had doubled to 3,000 reported cases. We have the FBI here today, and we may hear a little bit about this, but the FBI launched a multi-agency program initiative called Operation Stolen Dreams, and really targeting a lot of these mortgage fraud that we're seeing in our local communities. They identified 23 hotspots across the nation, and Michigan is one of those spots that were identified as we're looking at a lot of these foreclosure rescue scams and mortgage fraud. So, as I said, we are responding. We were so privileged to obtain a grant of $21,500 specifically to foreclosure scams and rescue scams through NeighborWorks of America, working through CEDM, working through the Michigan Foreclosure Task Force. Nita Delaney played a huge role in making this happen. And now we find ourselves in a position across our 9 counties where we can respond to this crisis that we're facing. We're going to have tailor-made materials for all of our agencies. We're going to have a lot of materials that's going to go out through all of our partners across our 9 regions to make sure we get the word out to our community members that they don't have to be victims of scams, and they can know what to do. Our purpose today, we're going to drill home a few points, major points on today. We want you all to understand how to identify foreclosure rescue scams. We want you to know how to avoid them, how to report them, and then we want you to understand how you can take action. We really want you to understand that if you know anyone, or if it's yourself, you don't have to be a victim of foreclosure rescue scams. So we have a really packed agenda, some great panelists. We have on our panel today, we have Laura Negron-Torones from Community Action Agency. She is a certified foreclosure counselor. She is on the ground every day doing great work, so we're privileged to have her with us today. We have Nita Delaney, co-director of the Michigan Foreclosure Task Force, with us on today, and she's going to give us a perspective from a state level and help us to understand what's happening from a state perspective. We also have Sean Nichols from the FBI here, and he's going to let us know what's happening nationally, statewide, locally, because they are seeing and litigating a lot of cases. And last but not least, we have Scott Teeter from the Michigan Attorney General's office, and they are prosecuting cases, and we're going to hear some great information on today. So again, I'm so glad all of you took time out of your busy schedule, out of the projected bad weather that they said we're going to have, and looks like we're okay. Okay, so I'm glad you still made it out. We have a great panel. So at this point in time, what I would like to do, we're going to get ready to bring Laura up to the stage first. Now, we're going to go through our panelists. We're going to have some great information shared with you. If you have questions, please feel free to write them down. Save your questions, because we're going to save a large portion of our time for questions and answers, okay? Because we want you to ask whatever questions that you want to ask, that anything related to foreclosure, because we have a great panel here to speak to you. At this point in time, I'd like you to welcome Laura Terronez from Community Action Agency. Laura?
Good evening. My name is Laura Terronez, and I work with Community Action Agency here in Jackson. And I just want to take this opportunity and thank Community Action Agency for this opportunity, my supervisor, Toby Berry, and Fred and Nita. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I would just like to share a little bit of information as a certified housing counselor, on the services that we provide at Community Action Agency. Okay, my apologies. I'm nervous, so my speech or my voice is going to be crackling, but thanks for your patience. Thank you. I'm really passionate about what I do, very excited about helping people. So this is not my forte here. I prefer to be with a homeowner face-to-face in my office as opposed to being up here. But I'm still grateful for the opportunity. Thank you. So just a little bit of information. Community Action Agency, we have, it is a HUD-certified agency, which means that they receive funds through the government. The counselors themselves are certified through Michigan State Housing Development Authority. So we receive funding through the state and through the government to provide these services for free to our homeowners. So this whole purpose of this meeting tonight was to inform the community and the homeowners on these, how they don't have to be a victim of scams. There's no reason if these services are being provided free for the homeowner, and that's what we do. In Jackson County, of course, it's Community Action Agency, and then also Jackson Affordable Housing that provides these services. So if anyone's familiar with us, and also Jackson Affordable Housing, okay? Just a little bit about what a certified housing counselor will provide for a homeowner. You can rest assured that when you come in to our agency and sit and meet with our certified counselors, it will be confidential information. We are held up to very strict standards through the state and through the government. And we also acquire our information, our training, our certifications. It's very, I'm trying to think of the word, but it's not coming to me, but very rigorous. I mean, it's not something that's just a fly-by-night type of thing. So we know that this is important information that we're sharing with our homeowners, and it's important to us. So all of it is confidential. We're held up to a strict code of conducts and standards. And we see people of all backgrounds, all incomes, all ages coming to see us. And so it's not just the younger generation. We see a lot of homeowners that are also in senior citizens that perhaps have experienced a loss of income or a reduction of income, whatever the case may be, that has caused them to fall into foreclosure. But what the counselor will also do is, in addition to providing confidential information, they will also provide a variety of solutions that may be available to the homeowner. They will complete an in-depth budget with that homeowner so that when we review the options, it is something that is specific to that homeowner. Okay, so the solutions are very specific to that homeowner. And we do have very honest conversations with that homeowner. We're not going to paint a rosy picture just to make them feel good. We want to be upfront and honest with them, with their solutions, with their options that are available to them. And as we're assisting them through that process to avoid foreclosure, we're going through an action plan that's providing them with the steps that are necessary to assist them through that process. And again, the main point is that no one can guarantee a mortgage modification for that homeowner. Again, just to tie into the whole purpose of this meeting. I've had homeowners that come in and they've paid anywhere ranging from $500 to $3,000 for assistance that these agencies, nonprofit, HUD certified, MSHDA certified agencies are providing free of charge. And these are homeowners that are already lacking in funds, that have been able to scrape the little bit of funds that they do have to try and have someone guarantee them a modification, and in the end they come to us after they've already exhausted all of their resources. And it's sad. It's sad to see, because they could have used that as something in addition to the workout that they're trying to get with their mortgage company. So very important just to know that the investor and along with the mortgage company are the only folks that are going to be the ones to guarantee a modification. So no one can do that for you other than those folks. And so just a little bit on the documents that would be needed, pay stubs, and I'm sure you've seen some of this information in the brochures with the Foreclosure Coalition brochures. Lots of helpful information there for the homeowners. But pay stubs for 1 month, tax returns for 2 years, W-2 forms, 2 months bank statements, mortgage billing statement, monthly and quarterly bills, so that when we sit with that homeowner, we're looking at all of the expenses that are going out. And these are credit card statements, hardship letter, short explanation as to what caused that homeowner to fall into default. And this is a lot of very personal information that we're sharing with that homeowner, and it's not that the counselor is wanting to be nosy. It's just that this is information that the mortgage company needs in order to try and get something worked out with that mortgage. So that's something that's very important for us to be able to get that homeowner to share with us and just be honest with all of their expenses that are taking place. So in the end, just again, the only folks that are able to modify a mortgage is through your mortgage company and the investors. And you don't have to be a victim of fraud, and I'm encouraged to hear what other information we're going to be able to share with our homeowners as they come through our counseling sessions. So I'm all set if anyone has any questions, either now or later. Okay. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Laura. Hey, thank you again, Laura. Very good. And Laura and Community Action Agency is on the ground every single day. They're seeing, as you can hear from Laura and the passion that she shares with us, they're seeing this every single day. I mean, homeowners are falling victim. They're already struggling with making their mortgage payments. But then on top of that, someone is soliciting them at a vulnerable time and guaranteeing that they can modify their mortgage, that they can help them get out of foreclosure. And so many times we're finding, and you heard from Laura's brief testimonial there, that some homeowners are falling victim to it. So we're so glad to have Community Action Agency and counselors like Laura on the ground every single day doing what we can to combat this locally. Now we're going to transition a little bit and talk a little from the task force standpoint. Nita Delaney, the co-director of the Michigan Foreclosure Task Force, is with us, and we're going to hear a little about this from a broader perspective, from a state level, and see how this is impacting us, and hear some great information from a state level. Nita?
Thank you. I'll get myself set up around the wires here. What I want to do is, first of all, give you an idea of that there is a whole, I'll call it an ecosystem of people in this state, at the local level, at the regional level, at the state level, that, believe it or not, are working on this crisis. One of the things that I run up against is, I think, because the crisis hasn't gone away, because we haven't been able to, in most people's eyes, make a real significant difference with it. I think that a lot of people are weary of the crisis, and I would even venture to say that the small group that we have here tonight is probably indicative of the fact that it's such a, it can be such an overwhelming topic to talk about that I think a lot of people feel that there's really pretty much nothing that we can do to make it any different. I would argue with all of that, and part of what I want to do in the beginning here is just to give you an idea of what the State Foreclosure Task Force does, give you a good sense of the national and Michigan picture, so it's kind of a backdrop for some of the numbers that Fred shared with us. Then I want to home in on how the Michigan Foreclosure Task Force works with regional task forces and local agencies, giving you some specific examples of the things that we were able to accomplish together, and then home in specifically on foreclosure scams and what we do in working with partners around the state, and how you can use us as a resource to accomplish some of the things that Fred mentioned in the beginning, which is how do you identify a scam, how do you avoid a scam, what do you do when you think you've been part of one, and what role can you play in working with the people that you see up here on this panel today in making sure that the people who are perpetrating these scams are actually are brought to justice. So let me start with the Michigan Foreclosure Task Force. In many ways, we're very similar to the regional task force that exists in Jackson, Lenawee, Hillsdale, and now in a 9-county region, in that we are a broad-based coalition. We were started in 2009 by a state not-for-profit called CEDM, which is a Community Economic Development Association of Michigan. We have members, about 440 plus members in 180 organizations. In the case of a statewide task force like ours, many of our members are statewide organizations, but we also have individual not-for-profits, individual citizens, individual businesses, just a whole range of members who all understand that they've got a stake in the game in making sure that we are responding effectively to this crisis. You see there a list of the kinds of members that we have, and at some point in the evening here, I will make a pitch for anybody who's in this audience tonight to become a member. It's free. The only thing that it does for you is that you're going to get a lot of good information, have a direct line into some of the things that I'm sharing with you tonight. So it's a painless kind of membership to have, and it has a lot of benefit and value. And your local regional coalition is a member. But I also would encourage individuals to become members too. We do several things. We serve as an information hub. There is so much information that is needed by not just homeowners, but counseling agencies, counselors, legal service attorneys, elected officials, business people, and we really try to pull together all of the relevant information about foreclosure. What are the big trends? What's happening in Washington? What's happening in the state legislature? So that we can make it accessible to people and then gather it together and then spit it back out to our membership and also to the media. So we do a lot of work as far as sharing information. We also advocate for public policy, and a good specific example of a success that we've had and that I hope we continue to have is in Michigan. Well, let me back up and say this. Since the beginning of this crisis, one of the biggest challenges is that homeowners have had a really hard time getting in to talk to the right person in their lending institution. It's just tough. Most of the mortgages held in Michigan are held by big box banks, so it's not as easy as walking down the street and talking to your local credit union or your local banks. It's a difficult thing, and so what this 90-day law does that we were able to put into place is it requires that the lenders in Michigan have a face-to-face meeting with the homeowners who are at risk. It also provides the homeowner with an additional 90 days to work with the lender to try to come up with some alternative to foreclosure. And the law also directs people to foreclosure counselors like Laura across the state, wherever Laura is now. Laura's right here, to Laura across the state. So there are certain things that a homeowner has to do to take advantage of that 90-day law. I mean, they have to open their mail, and they have to see the letter that notifies them that they're going into foreclosure. They have to act on the letter, which is basically to call their lender and or foreclosure counselor, and they have to do that within a limited period of time. But the lender has requirements too. That lender has to meet with the homeowner. And so this 90-day law, while we're going to fight for some improvements to the law, it sunsets in July of this year, and right now we're building our case for why we should extend the law and why we should put in place some improvements. Like any law that's put in place for the first time, once you start using it, then you see where the weak spots are. And so we're going to work to get some of the improvements to that law. But the bottom line is Michigan's lucky to have that law, because a lot of people are meeting with their lenders that would not otherwise be successful in even making that meeting happen. We also act as a capacity builder for the whole network of HUD and MSHDA certified counselors, which Laura talked about what the counselors do, how they're trained. I am going to add to that and say that we know all the research indicates that the housing counselors, the legitimate HUD and MSHDA certified housing counselors, are the most cost-effective tool that we have in fighting foreclosures. It costs about between $1,000 and $1,200 to save a home when you're paying for a counselor, versus what the dollar amount of every foreclosure is about $50,000, and that doesn't even take into consideration all the spillover costs. So we work to make sure that there's training available for those counselors in the state. We are also working on a piece of legislation to provide funding for those counselors. It's a challenge. There isn't enough funding to fund enough counselors, as many counselors as we need. So we also fight for that. Foreclosure. One of the other things that the task force does, I like to think about it as we share information and resources. One of the resources we've been able to put in place and share related to counselors is we were able to put together a unique program called the Michigan Foreclosure Prevention Corps, and it's an AmeriCorps program. It's AmeriCorps members, but it's funded by Bank of America and another broad-based coalition, and it makes available, there are 21 Foreclosure Prevention Corps members placed in housing counseling agencies around the state, and the local community action agency has been able to take advantage of one of those positions each year for the last couple years. And why is that important? Because the foreclosure counselors are swamped, and a lot of their work requires a lot of administrative support, and so these AmeriCorps members can help with that. So bottom line for the homeowner, you get in to see your counselor more quickly. Oops. Left-hand side. Oh, my goodness. We'll try doing this. Okay, great, thank you. Oh, you know what I'm doing? I had it upside down and I'm hitting the wrong side. This is just a real quick picture. Fred told you what the numbers look like. The reason to show all of these bulleted dots of data is what I'm finding is people don't realize that this is going to be with us for a while. And we can't just bury our heads in the sand. So when you look at this, the crisis has grown and expanded in the last 2 years. Laura alluded to the fact that it's not just a particular type of home or homeowner or neighborhood or community or anything else. It has expanded and it's grown in terms of numbers. Between 2009 and 2010 across the country, foreclosures were up 35%. These next two totally blow my mind. 1 in 10 Americans are at least 1 month behind on their mortgages. 1 in 10 people. Line up 100 people in this room. 1 in 10 people are at least a month behind. And 5 million Americans right now are in some stage of foreclosure. This is no longer driven by subprime mortgages. It is now all about unemployment and being underwater on your home, owing more money than your home is currently worth. Those are the two drivers right now. It's not about subprime mortgages or tricky mortgages. That's not the bulk of what we're seeing. We are also seeing a growing number of what I would call strategic walkaways, and that is the underwater homeowner who looks at their situation and says, gee whiz, I don't have any equity in the home yet, or I've got very little equity, and look what look what I'm paying, and is this a financially smart decision for me to stay in the house? So you have that complicating the situation. You got tons of people who desperately want to stay in their homes and are trying to find a way to stay in their homes, and you also have people who are looking at the situation saying, you know what, I don't think it's smart for me to stay in my home. But at the bottom line is every single foreclosure hurts not only the family that's immediately affected, but it hurts neighborhoods, it hurts the housing market, hurts the value of the homes around that foreclosed home. Sales of existing homes, again, just some of these highlights are at a 9-year low. That was just this week. Such a National Association of Realtors came out with that. Bank repossessions are at record highs. We expect nationally 13 million homes to go into foreclosure, and we've seen about 3 million, so we got a long ways to go. So let me quickly move to what Michigan looks like. We're consistently ranked in the top 10 in terms of rates of foreclosure. Currently, we're number 7. The completed foreclosures, this is a different figure than foreclosure filings. You file for a foreclosure, that's one set of important information. Another set is how many of those turn into actual foreclosures. So we've got our completed foreclosures in the state of Michigan, just like regionally, went down slightly between 2009 and 2010, from 103,000 to 118,000, but the filings are up. So the filings are up, and we've got this slowdown in the processing of foreclosures, a lot of it driven by some of the robo-signing scandals that have to do with lenders. This next number is a cumulative number over time since the crisis began. In Michigan, we've got 1 in 33 homes subject to a foreclosure filing versus 1 in 45 nationally. That number is a different way to look at the same thing that Fred was looking at. It's cumulatively, how many foreclosures have we had since this thing started, instead of just the snapshot. And then this last one, 72,810 properties repossessed by lenders. That's up, and that's 2010, up from 2009. So a few more projections. What can we expect in Michigan? All the projections are about 326,000. That means we're maybe about 2/3 of the way through, maybe not quite. We are, again, in the top 5 for largest declines in property values in our state, and 40% of Michigan homeowners are underwater on their mortgages. Think what would happen if they all decided to walk. It's just a very scary thought, in addition to all of the people who desperately are trying to stay in their homes and in some instances can't. Foreclosure rescue scams, which is what everybody else on the panel is going to give you some good details on. We see them all the time at the state level. We see them. I'm amazed that when a new program comes out to help homeowners, it's amazing to me. When the Obama program first came out, it's called the HAMP program. There was a company that came out that had one letter different in the whole name. It was making homes affordable. They made it singular instead of plural, put it on a government-looking letterhead, put up a website. And we see this happen with every program that comes down the line. Somebody puts out something that's bogus that looks legitimate. So we do see a real proliferation of those scams. Behind the numbers, again, unemployment and being underwater, and Sean's going to be able to speak to this, but the FBI has a special team in Michigan because we've been targeted as a vulnerable state, and scammers have been successful in our state. I won't spend a lot of time on the impact on foreclosures, except if you think of this as kind of a reaction tree. Impacts the family, impacts the neighborhood and the community, impacts the housing market, the local unit government, the tax base goes down. Local units of government are less able to provide basic services, and all of it really stalls economic recovery. So the bottom line is, I can't think of anyone that I know who hasn't been touched by foreclosure. The crisis is in our own backyard. It's not going away soon, and we, for one, as a state organization, are really going to put a lot of energy in trying to get people re-engaged and in finding ways to fight it, particularly at the local and regional level. I'm going to cut through this and talk just a second here. As a statewide task force, our strategy for fighting this whole thing is really simple. It's twofold. It is, first of all, work very hard through all of our partners to get people to the right place to get help. And that's the whole network of foreclosure counselors that we're talking about. We do that in a number of ways. We work through the local coalitions, and we work directly with housing counseling agencies. The other thing is we also work hard to make sure people aren't going to the wrong resources. So that's really like foreclosure scams are like the other side of the same coin. Our job is get people to the right legitimate resources, and at the same time tell them how they should, what they can do to avoid being scammed by the illegitimate resources. And I'll just say this right now because it's something that, and I think everybody up here will say, and that is that 3 things to do to avoid being scammed. Never pay any money up front to anybody, no matter how legitimate they look, if they tell you that they can help you save your home. Number 1, big red flag, don't do it. Second thing is, if anyone, as Laura said, promises you that they can save your home, they're full of baloney. Nobody can make that promise. We can work with you, come up with some creative options, but nobody can make that promise. That should be a red flag. And the last thing is never sign anything you don't understand, ever. So if you adhere to those things, those are good general rules. So what do we do specifically at the state task force related to foreclosure and foreclosure scams? We're a member of the Michigan Financial Fraud Work Group, and that is a big team of the Attorney General's office, FBI agents from around the state, a variety of other people, county prosecutors who are involved in this, and we're constantly educating one another so that we know what's out there as far as these scams, and that we're consistent in trying to tell people what to do, what they look like, so that they know one when they see one, and making sure people know where to call. We have a partnership with the Attorney General's office, and we act as a conduit for taking foreclosure scam information and funneling it through to the Attorney General's office and or the FBI. We also try to list their numbers on all of our printed materials, so if you want to call them directly, that's fine too. But people are actually doing things about this, and I'll just tell you, locally here in Jackson, I was sharing this with Scott Teeter just before we got started. I went to a financial fraud work group in Detroit and really got up to speed on some of the newer scams that are going on, one of which is called a flopping scam, which involves short sales and actually someone acting supposedly on behalf of a homeowner, ending up actually fraudulently working with the bank. So at the end of the day, the bank agrees to a short sale that's less money than what the scam artist is going to get for the home. So the homeowner's on the hook for the difference between this lower amount and what it actually sold for. So it's a form of fraud. And I learned about this, and the very next day, someone from the Jackson community called me to let me know that there is a multi-million-dollar flopping scam going on in Jackson County. And we are working with the Attorney General's office right now, as we speak, on investigating that. So, I mean, this is not stuff that happens just other places. It's happening right here. And that's not the only kind of scam that we see. We see a wide range of different types of scams. So we pass that kind of information on to the Attorney General's office. If someone thinks they've been scammed, they can call those numbers directly. Often what we found is that sometimes people are intimidated to call a government office like that, or they're not sure and they don't want to raise red flags if it turns out that, you know, it really wasn't a scam. So calling us is a nice in-between, and we can serve as that conduit and kind of screen things out and help make sure that we get it in the right hands. There's the website for the Attorney General's office, and I'm sure Scott will, talk about that, and the recent example, as I just mentioned. We also provide outreach and education resources in the grant that Fred really recently referred to. I mean, we come to events like this to share information. We make grants possible so that printed materials to launch scam prevention campaigns are out there. So that's pretty much the role that we play, the kinds of things that we do directly. And I guess before I pass this on to anyone, I think that if there's one message I'd like everybody to know is that there are things that can be done about this. And I think Scott and Sean can both speak to successful investigations and prosecutions, and can also talk about the specific scams so that you know what to look out for. Before I heard about the flopping scam, I never in a million years would have identified it. I wouldn't have identified it. Oftentimes it's a real estate agent acting unethically and unlawfully, not always a real estate agent, but I never in a million years. I would have fallen prey to that if somebody had approached me who I thought was legitimate and said, look, I can save your house, I can do a short sale for you, we'll make things better. I would have fallen for that, and now I won't, because I've learned about what, that is out there, and that's just one form. So with that, Fred, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Nita. Great information. And again, as you heard, Nita is the Michigan Foreclosure Task Force is seeing this on a state level. They're seeing a lot of things come their way. They're working with all the partner agencies across the whole state. And a lot of information, a lot of scams, a lot of things are being reported to them, and they are taking action. You heard a little bit about that. So we heard about what's happening on the local level with Laura and Community Action Agency, what's happening on the state level. And Nita also gave us a picture of what's happening nationally in foreclosures and what we're seeing statewide. Now we want to kind of segue in and talking about what we're doing about this. One thing that we said from the very beginning, how do we take action? We heard about how our local agencies are taking actions and how our foreclosure task force is taking action. But when we report this to the authorities, what are they doing? How do they take action? How do they work with us? At this time, last but not least, bringing up the rear, we're going to bring up Mr. Scott Teeter. He is from the Michigan Attorney General's office, and so he's going to talk to us a little bit about what's happening from the Michigan Attorney General's office today. Scott.
Abraham Lincoln once said, all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And I can tell you that, unfortunately, in this area, what happened was the bad guys got out ahead of the good guys. Most of law enforcement is reactionary. Somebody goes, commits a crime, they report it, then we scramble around and address it. And that's sort of what happened, is that when, particularly when the mortgage market collapsed, these guys hit the streets running. And then when the federal government came in with a response with the Obama program, it added fuel to the fire, because then everybody and their brother threw up a sign that said, yeah, I can write one of those for you, and just pay me several $1,000s and I'll solve all your problems. And the fallout from that has been disastrous. And so let me explain, first of all, for my boss, Attorney General Bill Schuette, this is a big priority. A substantial amount of my caseload, and I have 2 investigators who work with me, it is specifically to handle mortgage rescue fraud and Ponzi schemes and other financial crimes. It's a big deal. Started under Attorney General Mike Cox last year. I was moved into the division, corporate oversight division, in April. And we had already done some of those cases, but last summer we did a bunch of them, and we've been doing a bunch more since then. And so I tell you that because this effort will not only continue, but it will continue to grow. And right now, so far, we have 28 cases that we have already filed on, and specifically against Michigan rescue scams. Out of those, we've been in Allegan, Livingston, Macomb, Oakland, Wayne, Eaton, and Ingham, and we've got a bunch more pending. Running from a minimum of 8 to 10 victims up to 400 victims, at a minimum 25,000 up to over $1 million. And so I can tell you the most successful way to come out of this intact is to avoid being a victim in the first place. And I know that sounds pretty simplistic, but it's absolutely correct. Sadly, if we would have been on the front end of this and seen it coming, we could have got some of these warnings out a little earlier, and we wouldn't have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are lined up as victims, waiting to get their cases handled. But we're out there now, and you need to know, because they're not done yet. I mean, these things are going, and they're going every day. And you'll see a slide later, but we get calls just about every day from a new victim. And so I'm going to kind of outline some of those red flags. Bottom line is, if you hear any of these things, if you have a relative that hears this thing, any one of the things on this list, stop. Do not let them work with that company. If you have questions, you contact your local agency, contact the Attorney General's office. We can take a look. I mean, we've got literally hundreds of these companies that have been reported, and so when the next complaint comes in, we can certainly pull it up and tell you, yeah, we've got pending complaints on that company. Sadly, these things were switching names and running and gunning so fast that a call to the Better Business Bureau for a lot of our victims was not helpful, because at that point, the Better Business Bureau hadn't gotten any complaints yet. There was this lag time from when the company went into operation to the time they started screwing people over. And when that lag time hit, that's when they called the Better Business Bureau, and they said, well, we don't have anything. And they became the next victim. So, and just to outline my responsibilities, I'm a prosecutor. I've been a prosecutor for 18 years. I was formerly an elected county prosecutor. My job is to work with our investigators, go into court, pick up a hammer, and whack people who do this. It's that simple. And I have that with the blessing of the Attorney General for the state of Michigan. And it's a pretty big hammer. And I have a lot of fun whacking them, frankly, because these people are predators. That term is not overused. They pick on people who are weak. They pick on people who are scared. They pick on people who are desperate, and they'll take their last nickel and walk away with it. One of the companies that we're in the process of prosecuting right now, he drives a Porsche. And I know where the payments came from. Somebody who lost their house. So, first of all, as has already been said, if they guarantee to stop the foreclosure process, they are a liar. It's that simple. And that cannot happen. And frankly, only the bank can give you that information. And even that, I can tell you, is frankly a little tenuous until the paperwork's actually been executed. Because we've had people who said, well, I was talking to the bank. The bank said, yeah. And then, I did a trial mortgage payment plan. I made all my payments in 7 months, and at the end of it, they told me no. So yes doesn't necessarily mean yes even then. It sure doesn't mean it when they call you or you call this company. Instructs you not to contact your lender, lawyer, or creditor, housing counselor. Again, that person is a liar, and they are a criminal. And the reason being is because what they want to do is be the sole source of your information, so that you cannot possibly double-check the fact that they are not doing anything for you. And so if you were still in contact with your lender, you would find out that they had not even made contact with them, or they'd sent in the one form that says, I have authorization to talk to a third party, and nothing else. And so bottom line is, if they give you this advice, they are setting you up to take you down. Any other thing is, if you contact a lawyer, you'll find out, of course, what they are planning to do next is illegal. Or if you contact a creditor housing counselor, what you'll find out is you can get this done for free. And they won't have a fee. They collect a fee before providing you any services. That's against the law. It's called the Credit Services Protection Act. And as I mentioned before, we were behind in some of, and I'll talk about that in a minute, in terms of having a statutory scheme that protected people, but this was on the books. And it's been on the books since 1993. Hadn't been used in this particular application, but we started it, and sure enough, it still works. And we prosecuted a whole bunch of companies with this particular statute, and I'll break down what those requirements are. It encourages you to lease or rent your home so you can buy it back over time. That'll never happen. They'll sell it to somebody else. They'll take the payments. They'll walk away with it. You will lose your home. It's that simple. You will just make it a lot quicker if you sign it over to them. It tells you to make your mortgage payments directly to it rather than to your lender. Again, what will happen is they won't go anywhere but to them, and they'll never make it to your lender. I have one of these just called in yesterday. She has been making payments of over $6,000 a month for a year. $72,000 and not a nickel went to her lender. And she's in trouble. Because the one thing I cannot do is I can't stop the foreclosure. I can whack the people when I catch them. Sadly, some of these folks don't use their real names, and so that's been an issue. If they're real scammers, they end up using some kind of a phony identity. But I can't stop the foreclosure. Now, housing counselors can assist you. I can't even do that. What we do is we do referral initiative, or we do referral to other folks to try to get you some help in that area while I'm going after the bad guys. But bottom line is, I'm nearly positive when I eventually track those folks down, that $72,000 is long gone. And, the bank's still waiting, going, well, all we know is we didn't get a payment for a year, and we're not willing to work. Tells you to transfer your property deed or title to that person. Don't ever do that. Not unless you sell it to them and they give you, cash. I wouldn't even take a certified check, cash, and that will never happen. Offers to fill out paperwork for you. Yeah, that sounds really convenient, and I can tell you that it saves you about 10 minutes and it'll cost you your house. There's stuff that gets stuck in the paperwork all the time, and I'll tell you about that too. Pressures you to sign paperwork that you haven't had a chance to read thoroughly, or that you don't understand, and that's already been said, but I can't stress it enough. Even working with a legitimate bank, do not sign stuff that you don't read. Because the problem is, when eventually we walk into court, the only question they're going to ask is that your signature on the bottom? And when you answer yes, you are presumed to have read it. Why? Because only goofballs sign stuff they don't read. Right? That's what the law thinks. Now, practically speaking, lots of people don't read all of that stuff because they put it in print that's really, really small, and they do lots and lots of pages. And I get really tired reading all of it, and I'll just sign it at the bottom because this is the bank, of course I can trust them. Did you see those numbers about the foreclosures? The bank is not your friend. They are your lender. Okay? If this were your mom, then you could probably trust her. They're not your mom. Okay? Their job is fill out the paperwork. When you don't follow it, they take your house. Don't sign any documents without reading them first. Many homeowners think they are signing documents for a new loan when they are signing away their homes. That's, again, the scam. Is what you think you're doing is either doing a modification or refinance. What you were doing is sort of a transfer. And by the time you walk out the door, they run down to the courthouse and file those papers. And they won't mention it to you or anybody else until eventually the new owner will come to buy their, to move into their house, which is your house. But it's not anymore. Don't transfer title to sell your home to the foreclosure rescuer. Same problem, because, again, they'll walk away with your house, and it'll just speed up the process of you losing your home. Don't pay money to a foreclosure rescuer before any work has been done. Mentioned that. Okay. Don't ignore letters from your lender loan servicer. There is a commonly held belief that ignoring bad news makes it go away. No, it makes it worse. Okay. If you get a letter and it says call us, call them. Okay, first of all, it can't reach to the phone and smack you, so it's not going to, it may be painful, but it won't be that painful. If there's stuff inside those documents that you don't know about or you don't respond to, the bank tracks those contacts. The less contact from you, the faster the process moves against you, because they figure you're not interested. And how would they know you're not interested? Because you don't talk to them. That's why. And again, that's why these scam companies work on that silence, is because they want to be the only person talking to you, so you can't double check what they're not doing. So again, and lenders, and we've had mixed reviews. Frankly, I've had lenders who've been pretty cooperative. I've had lenders who've been terrible. And some of them, though, have actually had people inside their own operations who have this responsibility to sit down, talk with you, and really try to work out a way to save your house. But you never called them. You never answered the letter. You never got in contact with that person. And so, like I said, he returned the call or send back the letter. Usually call. Now, you may have to talk to 5 or 10 different people while you're on one automated, system or another, but answer the letter. Don't pay your mortgage payments to someone other than your lender, even if she promises to pass the payment on to the lender, even if it's your mother. I wouldn't do that. Bottom line is, it never goes anywhere other than to them. Why? Because that's how it works. Do contact HUD. There's their phone number. Write that down. Or MISTA. That's their phone number. Write that down. For referral to a housing counselor. And I can tell you that at least we've referred a number of people to both of those agencies, and we've seen some success. Again, it's not guaranteed. It depends on the lender. One of the mistakes that was made in this, Making Homes Affordable program was we gave out, piles of money to the banks. The only thing we didn't attach to it are strings, which is the government. I would think the government attaches strings to everything. You think we'd do that to $1 trillion, and the answer was they didn't. And there's nothing in there that mandated lenders to work out modifications. So the banks got a pile of money, and homeowners who are really in trouble, and there's no requirement for one to help the other. That's unfortunate. That was a mistake, and it's going to take a little while to see if we can recover from that mistake. But there are folks that are out there working, and like I said, some banks now, the volume has gotten so substantial that all of a sudden they went, wow, maybe throwing everybody out of their house is not a good idea, because that means the money stops coming in. And you have lots of vacant houses all over the place that become crack houses or, all kinds of other problems, and the value drops so dramatically that there's no way they can sell the property. And so it's almost started, and we've hit that point where there's so many that now the banks have gone, well, maybe that strategy isn't really a good idea. If we take, 1,000 homes, that's one thing. If we take 100,000 homes, it starts to get, difficult. Okay, and again, we get these just about every day. This is the statute that we've been using. A credit services organization is a person who, in return for consideration, attempts to sell, provide, or perform one or more of the following. The improvement of a person's credit record, history, or rating. The obtainment of an extension of credit is the one that I've been using. Getting a mortgage modification or a new loan is the obtainment of an extension of credit under that definition. Advice or assistance regarding improvement or repair of a person's credit record, history, or rating. And I've had companies that have done that. They've offered to do mortgage modifications and work out your student loans and work out your credit cards. Well, they didn't do any of them. That lady got sued. Her wages got garnished, and she lost her house. And when she started working with that company, she was up to date on her student loan payments, up to date on her credit cards, and up to date on her house. And her credit rating was pretty strong. But she knew her hours were going to get cut back and things were going to get tight, so she went to this person for help. When she got done, she lost her house. She'd been sued. She had a judgment entered, and half of her paycheck was being seized. That person, before I get done, I will send that person to prison, because there's about 45 other victims that she's left, and out of the 45 that contacted my office, 40 lost their homes. What she was doing, it's on the west side in Allegan County, she was combing the sheriff's sale notices in the paper and then making contact with those people either by telephone or driving up in their driveway. The one couple found out it was in the newspaper because she drove up in the driveway. They didn't even know it. And they said, saw your house was in the sheriff's sale notice. And they're like, it is? Pulls out the paper and said, and for $780, I can stop that. Well, no, she can't. Then they paid her $780, and she rode off into the sunset for a while. I'm going to enjoy sending her to jail. Advice or assistance regarding obtainment of extension of credit, same kind of thing. So we're clearly on solid legal ground. We've been in lots of different courts. We've won this one over and over and over. Again, this is another section. If they provide advice or assistance regarding foreclosure, they're a credit services organization under the statute. Then this is the one that they're offering to do, serve as an intermediate between a debtor and a creditor on behalf of the debtor regarding credit that was extended prior to any agreement to have the credit services organization serve as an intermediate. That can apply to not only mortgage modification companies, but these credit service agencies, where they can go in and we'll step in now and negotiate with your credit card companies. It does not include, these are exceptions. The statute does not apply to somebody who's licensed in the state or otherwise authorized to make loans or extend credit under any state statute while engaged in a regular course of business. Doesn't apply to banks, doesn't apply to finance companies, doesn't apply to credit unions, those kind of things. And it also doesn't finance companies. Was the other one. Person licensed under the occupational code when engaged in the regular course of business. And this is important because a number of realtors have gotten into this business. Some have set up separate companies to do this business. I did one in Livingston County, 45 victims. They ranged all the way up to $6,000 per modification. They were in the little higher, high dollar group. And it was 2 real estate agents. They didn't run it through their brokerage. They weren't even brokers. They were just agents. They set up a separate company and they ran it. They're not exempt under the statute. What this applies, and then we've done that, we prosecuted them because our position is, and the law supports that, is if it's incidental to the sale of real estate, where you're counseling somebody on how to fill out an application or who to go to for financing or assisting in getting their mortgage through the bank and all of that to get a mortgage on the property they're selling, that is when engaged in a regular course of business as a real estate agent. If you just come in and say, I want a modification, and they charge you for that, that is not a real estate agent's business. That is a mortgage loan modification, totally separate. They're covered by the statute when they're doing that. So that's why that's an important distinction, because we have real estate agents out there who think they are exempt, and they're not. Person licensed to practice law in this state if that person renders services within the course of that person's practice as an attorney and does not engage in the business of a credit services organization on a regular and continuing basis. I have prosecuted lawyers in the last year. That's especially fun. I have a friend of mine who was an accountant that said that's the reason why you'd never become a lawyer, is because they're carnivorous, they eat each other. I can tell you that as a prosecutor, that's sort of like, there's a special star that you get for taking down other lawyers. Not true, but you should. And the reason being is because this person set up a website to do mortgage loan modifications and used a phony name. And then later tried to claim, well, that was under my practice of law. So that's strange, because that name is not licensed to practice in the state of Michigan. It's not even a real name. Try that again. He ended up pleading. And but I can tell you that where this does apply is if you walk into a lawyer's office and say, okay, I need help. I'm in trouble with my mortgage. I want you to intervene, on my behalf, and I'll. And he quotes you a $2,000 retainer, and this is only one part of his general practice of law, then he's not covered by the statute. He can take a retainer up front and handle it like any other case. You set up a separate company when all you're doing is credit services and credit modification. You are not practicing as an attorney. You are practicing as a credit services organization, and then you forfeit that protection. So if you want to be a lawyer, be a lawyer. But if you want to be a credit services organization, then you better follow the law and not take the money up front. It doesn't include a judicial officer or other person acting under a court order. And that would be, a trustee or somebody else who's going to move in and take charge over the property. And consumer reporting agency while engaged in a regular course of their credit reporting business, Experian or TransUnion. A debt management business licensed under the Debt Management Act while engaged in a regular course of business under the Debt Management Act. And again, here, this is where we ran into a problem, is because there were companies, and we have a licensing requirement for debt management companies. That's not where these are coming in. The mortgage modification thing, there was no licensing requirement that required somebody who's going to negotiate a mortgage modification. Nobody ever expected an entire mortgage market to collapse and to create an entire industry of mortgage loan modification people. And so we got caught off guard. I can tell you, and I'll talk about it in a minute, we do now, but we didn't 2 years ago. Investment advisor or broker-dealer registered under the Uniform Securities Act. Again, if they're licensed under that act, they're going to follow those requirements. We can track that. And so they're exempt under this statute. And This one's kind of odd because a nonprofit corporation, it's a 501c3 exemption, they're not covered under this statute. And so we actually did have some pretty creative folks who wanted to do it on their own and then went out and created a phony 501c3 not-for-profit corporation so that they could charge up front. Because see, the problem is, and I get this all the time, their response is, well, if you do the work and you don't get the money up front, once the person gets the modification, they don't want to pay you. That's true. The problem that we ran into is the legislature had a choice of two different groups of people to protect. Either consumers who were in financial difficulty and were at risk of, if they paid up front, they wouldn't get the services they paid for, or the companies who may have difficulty collecting. Well, there's an entire mechanism when you don't pay your bill that you're lawfully required to pay, and it's called the court system. There's a debt collection mechanism, and if those efforts aren't successful, they can sue you, they can take you into court and avail themselves of all of those remedies. And the legislature made a call that that's enough protection for them. There's a bigger threat to consumers paying up front and not getting what they paid for. So that's how they came down. And a finance subsidiary of a manufacturing corporation, Toyota Credit, covered under there, so it's not covered under this. Prohibited conduct, this is the areas that break the law. Charging or receiving from a buyer who is seeking a loan or credit money before the closing of the loan or extension of credit. If they charge you up front to get a mortgage loan modification, that's a direct violation of this section of the statute, because the loan or extension of credit has not been completed at the time that the amount's charged. Now, I can tell you I've seen some very creative efforts at circumventing this. They break the contract up into three sections. One is consultation. You pay me money up front just to talk to you. And so when I get done talking to you, which is really the same time I've talked to you the first time, that's when you owe me $500. So those two would seem to happen at the same time. And then the next payment's due when we complete a package of filling out all your financial information. And I don't send it anywhere, I just fill it out. And I do that again based on interviews, so that seems to be now due at the beginning meeting. And then lastly, if you want to pay me extra, I'll then negotiate that with the bank. And so their argument is the only payment I'm not due right now is the very small payment at the end of this whole agreement when I actually negotiate with the lender. Our argument, and it's been successful all the way along, is no, what you presented this as was a mortgage modification. That's what they paid for. Until that whole thing is done, you're not entitled to payment. I've not lost that argument yet, because I didn't pay you $2,000 to talk to me. I didn't pay you $2,000 to help me fill out the little forms. I paid you for the mortgage modification. But that's where it's so important to read the documents, because part of the battle we've been running in some of these cases are the agreement says that. It says you're paying me $2,000 to sit here and talk to you about your options. Is that what you think you're paying me $2,000 for? I don't think so. But that's what you signed at the bottom. Charge or receive money from a buyer of services before completing performance of all services a credit services organization has agreed to perform for the buyer. And again, that's where we've made that argument, is until the modification is done, you've not completed all of the services you agreed to perform for the buyer. So you're not entitled to charge. Make or use a false or misleading representation in the offer or sale of the services of a credit services organization. So when you hear those words, we guarantee we will stop the foreclosure, we will get the modification. That is a false or misleading representation. That's a violation of the law. Or we have a 100% success rate or a 99% success rate. Fail to perform the agreed services within 90 days following the date the buyer signs the contract for services. This makes these people crazy. And the reason being is because none of them ever get them done within 90 days. Their defense for the companies who indicate that they really are trying to do this legitimately is that it is impossible to do it within 90 days because the banks won't process it that quickly. And our response is, then I guess you'd have to, at the 89th day, go back and re-sign your client and start all over. And if they're not willing to do it, then sorry, but the deal ends. But some of the ones, even the ones where they were making some efforts, it's a year. It's a year and a half. And then finally they quit and called us. Provide a service to a buyer that is not pursuant to a written contract that complies with this section. I've only seen a few companies that actually have not been doing this part. Now, the problem is what's included in that writing is, pretty scary. But most of them, somewhere along the line, have figured out that if I get them to sign the document, I can put all kinds of stuff in there because they won't read it, and that will protect me. It hasn't, but that's their belief. This is one of the other crimes that we've been charging because, again, making those statements of, I can get you a guaranteed modification, I can get you a guarantee to stop the foreclosure, I can get a mortgage of 2%, it will drop your payment in half, I'll drop your principal by 50%. All of those are representations that are knowingly made and they are false. Because again, what we end up finding out is the proof of this one is they didn't send in any of the documents to the bank. It gets a little more difficult if they sent in some of the stuff and actually seem to be making some effort. Most of the companies we've tagged with this haven't even sent any forms in. The elements of it are to make or use a false pretense, to obtain money from a person having a value of $1,000 or more but less than $20,000. The lady who was doing it at $780 a pop, I don't know if she had done some research and figured out that it was only misdemeanor if it's under $1,000. Problem is, if you don't go to law school, you don't read the next section, which says I can aggregate multiple victims within 12 months. So I can take the 780 from 50 different people, and we're well over where I needed to be. She was not that smart. Definition of a pretense. Pretense is the use of a statement, writing, or any other device that's false and or that could mislead the person it is presented to. That's the whole point. It's knowingly made to make someone else believe something that is false or to promise to do something, to have something done, knowing that it's not really going to be done. And what I find is both of these. No, they can't guarantee the foreclosure. No, they can't guarantee a 2% mortgage. No, they can't guarantee a reduction in your principal. And they don't have a 100% success rate, and they end up not even fulfilling the promise of, I'm going to send in all the paperwork and get all that stuff. This statute is the one I talked about, which should have been in several years ago, but nobody ever saw this train wreck coming. And that is, we now have the Mortgage Loan Originator Licensing Act, which is, and it's really specifically directed toward individuals, and then if they work for a company that they're covered, but the individual themselves has to be licensed. And the reason being is because these companies change names as soon as they get a complaint filed against them. They shut down one and start up another. And everything has got national, legal, Michigan, something that makes it sound legitimate in their names. Performing foreclosure rescue services have to be licensed by the Office of Finance Insurance Regulation. That's also the same group that license securities brokers, insurance agents. If you are approached, or if you think you want to call somebody like this and nobody else can talk you out of it, call OFR and ask, is this company licensed? Ask them, are you licensed by the state of Michigan? Regardless of what they say, call that phone number and ask. If that person is not licensed, they're breaking the law. As of July 31st of 2010, anybody who's an independent, that they're not working in-house for a bank, has to be licensed to do mortgage modification services, unless they're a registered mortgage loan originator when acting for an entity described in that section, which is they're in-house. They're working inside of a bank or finance company doing the modifications, or if you do it for an immediate family member. So your mom does not have to be licensed to negotiate your mortgage modification. And an individual offers or negotiates terms of residential mortgage secured by a dwelling that served as his or her residence. You can do your own. You don't have to be licensed. Licensed attorney, again, if it's incidental to their representation of a client, not that they've set up a separate business and are doing just that. And the commissioner may establish licensing rules, and he has, and interim procedures for the licensing and acceptance of applications. And what we've been doing is anybody who's had a complaint filed against them, we're kicking those names over to OFR so they don't get licensed, So we've been communicating back and forth to make sure that these folks don't, get legitimized. And again, sadly, what we find out is we have lots of really good information, and you've already worked with somebody like that. And if you are in that group, contact our Consumer Protection Division. There's the phone number. There's the website. There's a form that you push the button and you fill in the form. It goes directly to Consumer Protection. They review it, and then if it's complete, they ship it to my division. I also have complaint forms. If for some reason you're not computer savvy or you don't have access to the internet, take one of those forms. Again, I wish we'd done this presentation 3 years ago for thousands and thousands of people who have now been, screwed out of their money and their property across the state of Michigan. But we're here, and we are tagging the people who are doing this stuff. They're coming in droves. But if you know of somebody in this situation, put them in touch with our office. And again, if it's something that looks like it's a multi-state issue or it's very large, we're in communication with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office regularly. We kick cases back and forth because, there's plenty of business to go around. We're not competing with each other, trust me. Okay? Thank you very much, folks.
I wanted to mention, too, that phone number that's up there, as well as phone number for OPER, are in your local coalition brochure. They're in the small brochure that's got those phone numbers and those websites in it.
Thank you again, Scott. Wow, what a lot of great information. This is awesome. We looked at this from a ground level, what's happening in our local community. We looked at it from a statewide level. We looked at it from what's happening nationally, and we brought it home with how they're being prosecuted. This is really awesome. If you ever thought, if someone has told you, if you thought your voice doesn't count, I hope today that you leave with a better understanding that it does. Because as you've heard from many of testimonies, that it's your individual voices that gets trickled up to people like Laura, to like Nita, to Sean, and also to Scott, so that action happens. And if we're either afraid to report or don't know how to report, they can't be prosecuted, and these perpetrators action can't be taken upon them. So I'm so glad to hear them echo that on today, and we hope that you feel even more empowered with information. So now we had a great opportunity here, some great information, but now if you have any questions, any thoughts, we want to yield the floor to you at this point for any questions to any of our panelists. So at this time, does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? Fire away. Sure.
You said something about you could prosecute people on any information that they wanted that wasn't legal. Does that have to be in writing, or is it verbal?
If I understand your question, if they made promises to you.
They can say a lot of stuff.
Sure.
But if they don't put it down in writing, can you prosecute them for what they said?
If I believe you and not them, yes. If we can go into court, and that's why oftentimes we'll put together multiple cases, because if we have if I have 10 different people who all come in and do exactly the same story you did, and they're saying, well, we can say that, I'll do that. I've done it.
Yeah, I think you're recording, sorry. And so, yeah, if you don't have that stuff, if it's not reflected in your paperwork, you file the complaint. Let us worry about putting together and proving it, because you don't know, I may have 3, 4, 5, 10, 50 other people who are saying exactly the same thing you did. Because oftentimes what I run into is, all the sales pitch says one thing, and the paperwork says something different. And then only later, when people went back and looked at the paperwork, went, whoa, wait a minute, that guarantee's not in here. But that's why I wrote them the check. Well, if I've got, several people who are saying, well, no, I was guaranteed a 2% mortgage, even though it doesn't say that in the paperwork, that's why I wrote them the check. Yeah, I'll take that to court.
Good question. Yeah, that's a good question. Very good question.
Actually, no, those numbers are not included in that, and if you were to include those numbers, I mean, you would see unbelievable totals, because the way they don't include it, tax foreclosures in the state have roughly doubled in the last couple of years. But for the most part, foreclosure prevention has focused on mortgage foreclosures. But Cliff, you are right to bring up the fact that we've got huge numbers of tax foreclosures. And another thing that's happening is that oftentimes mortgage foreclosures that go back to the lenders are turning into tax foreclosures when the lenders are choosing not to pay the taxes. So there's a relationship now between the two. So you get two buckets of foreclosures. My numbers only looked at mortgage foreclosures.
When you see websites that have, where you can get mortgages, it's an Obama plan, you know, I don't believe all those, 'cause they scare me. I'm thinking they're just using Obama's name to attach to their company, and so how would you even discern who is legit and who is not legit?
We maybe all have other answers to this, but my answer to it is that get yourself to a certified foreclosure counselor. I mean, that's what my answer is, because I think some of the things that I've seen, the examples I've seen, nobody could see through whether or not they're legit or a scam. I mean, some of them have government seals on them, you know, I mean, they're really very clever cut and paste, you know, forged documents. I wouldn't rely on trying to see whether or not you could determine whether it was a fraud or not. I just make sure you're dealing with a certified foreclosure counselor, because they are connected to the legitimate resources. That's the safest thing to do.
Because I can tell you the representations you made on the website, all you have to do is have a website designer. They can type in anything they want. So they can say anything. Many of the cases that I'm working with, they were guaranteed a money-back refund. It's only as good as the person making that statement. And I've got 50 victims who all got guaranteed to get their money back, and none of them got their money back. And so, you know, you make those statements all day, but there's no way to enforce that once you send them the money. I mean, one of them we're working on right now, where they said, you know, we have attorneys on staff to review your file to see if you're going to be eligible. They called in. They said, well, hang on a minute, I'm going to have that reviewed by our legal department. Yeah, they said it looks like you can. That's exactly how it went down. There were no attorneys on staff. There was no one that reviewed it. They were to wait 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and pick the phone back up and say, yep, you're good. What's your credit card number? So, you know, the bottom line is, when you have people like this who have the contacts and have the resources, and they don't, you know, charge you anything, we need to put that entire industry out of business. Because, you know, maybe there's 1 out of 100 that actually are doing the work. I don't know. I don't hear about those. The only ones I hear about are the hundreds that aren't. So I wouldn't roll the dice in that game.
So most of these problems that are arising are from mortgage modification scams? I mean, it sounds like that's what a lot of you guys are talking mainly about, is mortgage modification scams where they're asking people for money to do that.
I guess I'll speak first. From my perspective, the answer is yes. Because that's right now where people are most vulnerable. We have so many people who are at risk of losing their home that they are the vulnerable population right now. So what are they looking for? They are looking for somebody who can help them modify their loan so that they can stay in the house. So I would say that certainly what we see at the state task force is most of these are related to mortgage modifications.
And when you use the term mortgage loan modification, it actually covers a couple different activities. One of them is, you know, they're going to go in under the Obama plan and get the 2% mortgage and get the principal reduced and all that. Second one is you have the whole pile of people who signed up for adjustable rate mortgages. And so what these people have represented is, you pay me the fee and I can go in and get you kicked out, moved from the adjustable rate mortgage that's going up exponentially, and you can't afford that to get you locked into a fixed rate. It's the same scam. It's just that, it depends on what your particular needs are, on what their presentation of what they can do for you is. But that's the two big piles that we see. We've seen a little bit with this, with the straw buyer thing, not a lot, just because nobody's buying. And so when the whole thing collapsed that quickly, that it was all people who either lost. The first wave were people that probably could have afforded the $250,000 house and bought a $400,000 house on an adjustable rate mortgage. That group's been gone for a while. The group that we're seeing right now they lost their job. The company downsized, company moved out of state. I know the governor's talked about it a lot, but there were 2 million jobs lost in this recession. 1 million of them were in this state. We didn't just lose jobs, we lost people. I mean, our entire state lost population. Detroit lost 25%. Well, when those people moved out of state, it was to follow their job. And so then you lost their sales tax revenue, their income tax revenue, their property tax revenue. You got hit 3 different ways, and the company's income tax. So, I mean, that's why you're seeing this ripple effect that has just shredded the state and local budgets. So, yeah, so when that group has gotten hit, all of a sudden, I want to stay in my house. It's really a house that I was making the payments on and could afford even on a fixed rate mortgage. And then I lost my job. And now you're in trouble. That group is sweeping through right now.
Another one of your fraudulent scams from your slideshow there was that these scam artists are asking the homeowner to sign over their deeds.
You look at that and go, well, why would somebody ever sign over their mortgage? The problem is because what they do is they approach the folks who are already in foreclosure. You see the notices in the paper. They got redemption periods. They're going to lose the house to the bank. And then somebody comes in at the last minute and says, all right, I've got private financing for you, and this will help you stay in your home. Well, the clock's already ticking. You're going to lose it to the bank. I'm desperate. I'll do something. Well, it's not a private loan. It's a swindle. And so then because what they say is, we'll make the payment to the bank, we'll take over the mortgage, you make the payment to, I've got one of these on my desk right now. We'll make the payments, to the private, mortgage person at the payment that you can afford, because they can't get a modification from their bank, they can't come up with the money to stave off the foreclosure. It seems like it's the solution to every problem. They walk out with the deed and we're done.
More questions? Wow, you guys are giving some wonderful questions. I mean, really, really wonderful questions. I mean, what's wonderful about this is a couple things. First of all, if you notice, we are taping this event. So it's our goal we're going to have this posted up on like a YouTube site. We're going to have some links that you can follow to go and watch this again. Or if you know someone that is struggling, maybe they're in limbo and they're thinking about this, or they just want more information, you can forward it along. So we're going to post this on YouTube. We're going to have a link for this. So that's why I'm so pleased about the questions that you're asking, because there's probably going to be somebody that's watching this that's going to be thinking a similar thing. So very good, very good. Any more questions? Still got a couple minutes. Any other questions? Well, great. You know what? Again, I really appreciate every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule for coming out today. We had some projected bad weather, but you guys said, hey, whatever they say, I am coming, and you came. So thank you for that. Want to say a big, big, big thank you to our panelists. Big thank you to our founding partner, Community Action Agency, for all their support. Jesse, thank you for all the support as well and helping to make this happen. Big thank you to the Jackson District Library for hosting this venue on today. A lot of people came together to make this happen. We work with a lot of people in the community, but most of all, we're here because of you, and we thank you for coming out. There's some information, some brochures that have a little resource table. Tama came over, and she's been here since we started, so thank you, Tama, as well. Any information you need, please feel free to gather that. Again, we had a lot of numbers on the screen. Some of those are in the brochure, so be mindful of that. If you missed a number here or there, please grab a brochure before you go. Remember, Scott said he had some forms if you feel you need one. And again, we're here if you have any questions or thoughts after this. Thank you again. Have a wonderful night, and please drive safe. Thank you.